Hey everyone, it is Shannon and I'm here today to do the Get to Know the Fantasy Reader tag. I am really excited about doing this tag. Anita from Anita Reads tagged me back when I just started coming back to my channel. So thank you, Anita, so much for tagging me in this tag. And the original was created by the Book Pusher. I will leave links to both of the original and Anita's video down below for you to check out. And it's funny because fantasy is one of the genres that I think I read more than I do, and that's one of the reasons why I started another project, but it is a genre I do read from. It's not my primary genre, but it is where a lot of my reading started, so it holds a special place in my heart, and I do kind of wish I read more of it, but, you know, maybe after doing this tag I will get re-inspired, although I think I am reading a fantasy novel right now. No, I'm in between books. They're on my TBR. As so many books are. So many books are, but this is more about the books I've already read. Or no, it's a combination of whole. It's got great questions. So let's just get to the questions. So the first question is, what is your fantasy origin story? How did you come to read your first fantasy novel? Now, this is definitely because of my family. I am the youngest of 4 siblings. I have 2 sisters and a brother, and we often read the same books. They would just get passed between us, and I'm not quite sure which of these. There's 3 I have here, and I don't know which of them was the first of all of them, but it's definitely one of these. And so it's either Pawn of the Prophecy by David Eddings, which is the first book in the Belgorod series, or it couldn't have been Guardians of the West, which is the first in the Malloreon, which comes after the Belgorod, but I remember reading all of those when I was in high school, early high school. And then also there's Dragons of the Autumn Twilight by Margaret West and Tracy Hickman, which is very much a classic. This is a Dungeons and Dragons. It's the first Dragonlance. I think it's the first, the Dragonlance Chronicles Volumes 1. It's very Dungeons and Dragons-y. It's very much, there is a group and they have one of each type in the party that you would have if you have played role-playing. Like there's the tank and there's the wizard type character, and then there's a dwarf. So funny because it's like I read this so long ago, and like I have such strong memories of certain characters in certain moments, but I have no idea. I don't remember the plot at all. And then for these, I haven't read them for a long time. I know Amy from Zoe Back reads them occasionally, and I always want to reread them, but I actually do not have them. These are all ones I borrowed from other people. My sister Jamie had the Belgrade and the Malloreon, and they just got passed between us. And I remember this one I found a little tough because it has a prologue that was really dry. And so I was like, I don't know if I can read this. And she's like, I can't remember if she recommended to just keep going or just jump, because, and then this, if you're unfamiliar with the Pawn of the Prophecy, you can probably tell by the title, Prophecy. This is very much the, like, young farm boy prophecy, long-spanning arc story. It's one of the ones that I'm like, I don't know how I would feel about it if I would reread it. Would I still love it as much as I did then? I think I've gotten the sense that Dragonstone the Autumn Twilight may not necessarily be a great book, but I have a special place in my heart, and I do actually want to reread it. I don't think I ever finished the series, but the Belgrade and the Malloreon, I definitely read all of them. So that is my origin story. It's all down to my family, so thank you, Jamie, Susie, Jason. And yeah, and that got me started, and I read those books all in high school. Number 2, if you could be any hero or heroine in a fantasy novel, who would you want the author to be, and what trope would you insist on in the story? I am not sure in terms of authors. It's one of the challenges I think with the fantasy genre is people end up going through so much, right? Like there's horrible things, you know, like just challenges, evil, like antagonists. There's, you know, I don't know if I'd actually want to be in a fantasy novel at all. But if I was so I don't have an author that I would be, this is the author. I'm going to talk more about authors later, but I don't have one that I would pick. But the one trope I would insist on, or the one thing I would insist on, is I would definitely want to be a shapeshifter and or communicate with animals. Like that is, I'm not signing up unless that's included. I'm not signing up. So those are the 2 things that are definitely definitely required. Number three, what is a fantasy novel you read this year that you want more people to read? So I have a couple, because I always cheat. I have a couple. This is actually a graphic novel by Chance or Providence, written and illustrated by Becky Cloonan. This was amazing. It's sort of like dark fantasy, and it's several sort of short stories, and it is beautiful. And I can't remember how I stumbled on it. I can't remember if I read something else that had like Becky Cloonan's work and then wanted to read more, or I read this and wanted to read more. But it is really, really wonderful. I read it through Hoopla, and I want to read anything that she does or illustrates, because she wrote and illustrated this. It's very, very cool, and it is dark. It's got some like tragic, and epic, but they're shorter stories, so it's really cool. And then for a standalone, I read The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill, and I read this as a buddy read with Izzy, Punk Rock Girl PA, and we read it earlier in the year, and I really enjoyed it. I was a little hesitant because one of the things that I don't like in fantasy is when the evil witch type idea, like the stereotype of how witches can be represented. And this does have a bit of that, but it also is a really wonderful story. It was also very different than I expected. I really thought it would be about one character, but it is more a cast of character, because it really, especially the title, it feels like it's going to be about the girl who drank the moon, but it's about a larger cast of characters and communities. So that was a bit surprising, but I did really enjoy it. But it took me a while to win me over, and there is also some darkness in this too. I think that actually is pretty common in fantasy, which is one of the challenges, because it's not always something that I like. But this is middle grade, so it's light dark. It wasn't gray. No, it's not gray. I don't know. Light dark. I don't know. Shadows. I don't know. Okay. Number 4. What is your favorite fantasy subgenre, and what subgenre do you not read much from? Now, I don't know if I would consider this a subgenre, because I consider it its own genre, and it is one of my 2 favorite genres, and that is urban fantasy. I read a lot of urban fantasy. I just really enjoy it. So the real world, but there's magic, or the real world, but there's shapeshifters, or the real world, but there's, sci-fi stuff. When you get into sci-fi, it gets a little, like, I don't know, is it still urban fantasy? The Sci Changeling series is what always comes to mind, because it is a combination of like a lot of different things. Even though I'm hit and miss on that one, I read those very, very slowly. But anything where it's like the real world or in a city. I don't actually consider urban fantasy to need to be in a city, but I live in a city, so I like city set things, and often fantasy isn't. So it's like current day in the city, but there's magic or shapeshifters or talking to animals or flying or what, like, yes, all those things, yes. So I read lots of those. And then in terms of a subgenre, I do not read much from. I actually don't think I have ever read a flintlock fantasy, and I pulled the definition from Wikipedia, and it says it's an emerging genre of fantasy milieu where the fantasy setting and all its trappings are being influenced by the early stages of the Industrial Revolution. I would just say it feels like fantasy, but there's like guns. Although sometimes there's guns in fantasy, but that sort of, for me, breaks the illusion that it's somewhere else, because I actually, generally with fantasy, I don't usually consider that it's on Earth. Like, I did not realize that often fantasy is considered sort of like just like Earth before tech, and I'm like, nah, it's not Earth, it's somewhere else. It's some other planet, it's some other world. It's, I don't know. Anyway, but flintlock, once you add guns, it feels like more kind of like steampunk. Like it's like, at a different time, a different, like magic exists, but at this sort of time of Earth. So, but for me, fantasy is like, no, fantasy can be anything. It certainly doesn't have to be Earth, unless it's urban fantasy, and then it's almost always Earth. Not sure. Okay, number 5. Who is one of your auto-buy fantasy authors? I don't actually have auto-buy authors for anything. I am a completist and I am happy to read everything, but I generally am much more of a library user and or a scribed user. So I don't, but I do like to pre-order from some authors because I know that is supportive to them. But I don't have anyone that's an auto-buy, but I do have a couple of auto-read authors or authors that I want to read their complete works, including Alona Andrews, which is a husband-wife team, and they did the Kate Daniels series. Jennifer Robertson, who did the Chronicles of the Shea Sully, as well as the Tiger and Dell series, which is one series that I'm trying to complete this year. And Ray Bradbury, who I'm not sure where people consider he falls in terms of genre, but like, I find a lot of what he writes feels urban fantasy. It might be a bit more speculative fiction, and then of course story to story and book to book it's going to be different. He definitely has science fiction as well. But there's I think, is he always real world? No, science fiction too. I don't know. Anyway, so those are my 3 that I am trying to read their complete works. So stand by for how long that's going to take. Okay, number 6. How do you typically find fantasy recommendations? Goodreads, YouTube, podcast, Instagram. For me, definitely YouTube is definitely a real key place in terms of watching people's videos and seeing what they're reading and recommending and hauling and TBRing. Is TBRing, can you verb that? TBRing? I'm not sure. Also, the BookTube SFF Awards has been a very, very strong touchstone for me in terms of current releases, because I don't tend to necessarily read a lot of current releases or read a lot of popular works. So that always, I find, like, keeps me in check in terms of, like, what's recently being released. And so that I'm usually very behind on reading the BookTube SFF Awards, but I do track it annually, and I do have a mini goal, which is actually a really big goal, to read all of, or at least try. There are some authors on there that I won't read anymore, but that I've tried a few times and I'm just like, nope. But I do want to at least try all of the works that are on the BookTube SFF Awards, and I would love to even just complete 1 year or like one category, even if it's like all of the short works over the years. So I have all these, like, it's like a bingo. It's like in my mind I have like a BookTube SFF Award bingo board in my head. I just want to complete. I'm a completist. I like to complete stuff. And then the other place I get recommendations is book club lists. So the Sword and Laser book club on Goodreads, and they also have a podcast, and then also the Lady Vaults, which Elizabeth from Books and Pieces runs. I am horrible at keeping up to date with book clubs, but I do follow them in terms of what they're reading, and I do always want to read all of the books, but I am not very good at keeping up to date, so, and I only just know that. And I recently started a recommendation spreadsheet because I often, by the time I get to a book, or by the time my library hold finally comes in, I can't remember where I saw it. So I started a recommendation sheet, so hopefully now when I read the books, I can actually refer back to and share who actually was the inspiration for reading the book. So that's one of my other things. Number 7 is, what is some upcoming fantasy releases that you are excited for? As I just said, I'm not really the best on the up and up in terms of upcoming and current ones, but I do have a couple. And I forgot to share some of my auto read authors include Jennifer Robertson, who did the Tiger and Dell series, Alona Andrews, who did the Kate Daniels series, as well as the Innkeeper Chronicles, and Ray Bradbury, who I did read this year. I read Fahrenheit 451, and I plan on reading more from him. But in terms of the question of upcoming releases, now I actually prepped this before this was, right around when this was released, and this is A Song Below Water by Bethany C. Morrow. This came out, I think, in June, and it is Sirens in Portland, Oregon. Yeah, and I actually have this. I won it in a giveaway. So I'm really excited. It has arrived. It's being quarantined right now. Otherwise, I would show it. So I'm really excited to read this. And also a recent release I'm also excited for, and I picked up on Kindle, is The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. I'm very excited about this. I believe he is also a Canadian author, so that is really cool as well. Next question. And if you have any upcoming fantasy releases you're really excited about, please feel free to let me know, because I am not the person to go for those recommendations, but I do love to receive those recommendations. Number 8, what is one misconception about fantasy that you'd like to lay to rest? I think mostly that tonally they're all the same, and I think people may have tried one or whatever was popular at a certain time, because we do go through popular types of works in fantasy, and it's great if you end up liking it, but if you try something at that time, like I'm sure a lot of people have read or tried Game of Thrones and were like, whoa, this is too dark, or this is too many characters, or why is every chapter a different person? Not all fantasy is like that. Not all fantasy has like everyone wanting the throne. You know, that is one type, that fictional monarchies are one type of a fantasy subset, and even tonally, like control over the throne is one, you know, way those stories can go, but there's also other ways that those stories can go, and just that tonally that they can be totally different. You can have adventure spirited type stuff, the world's gonna end type of prophecy, fantasy of manners, which I actually didn't even realize was a thing, even though people were saying it over and over and over again. I finally realized, oh, okay, I understand the tone of that now. It's not something that resonates with me, which is really great to know, because that means those types of books are not the ones for me to focus on, and that's okay. We don't have to all like everything. And then there's also dark fantasy, urban fantasy, flintlock fantasy that I previously mentioned, and I think there's also like a weird subset of like humor fantasy, you know, like Terry Pratchett, whom I have actually never read. And so I think there's so many different tones and subgenres that if you haven't tried something, well, and you're probably not watching this video, but it's like there are different things to try. So, and it's something that I want to try to do too, and understand which are the like different kinds or tones or subgenres within genres that I like and don't like, because it just helps you make decisions on which books to try. Anyway, so that's what I would like to lay to rest, is that they're all the same tonally. Now, number 9 is, if someone never read a fantasy novel before, can you recommend the first 3 books that come to your mind as places to start? So I think I went with more than 3. So what I came up with, Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury is, I think, a really good ease in, because it's more urban fantasy, and it has kid protagonists, and it's a really interesting story tonally. It's quite dark, it's got a carnival setting, but I think it's because it's a little real world, it's a little more easy to ease into it. So that's one that I would recommend. I read it last year. The Northern Lights, or His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. This one's a very popular series, so I almost didn't recommend it, but again, I think it's a really easy access point in terms of you following a kid protagonist. Oh, there's animals. I forgot about that. The demons are animals. I always want to say daemons, but they say demons. And this has a long arc story as well. It's only a trilogy, so it's not that intimidating if you do want to try a series, but they're only 3 books long, and great characters, really strong female protagonist, although this one has some themes in it that don't work for everyone, which are easy to look up if you're concerned. I don't want to go into that because it's sort of belief system stuff, but I think it's a great place to start, and I love the trilogy. And this one I haven't finished, I just have the last book in this series, but Alana, the First Adventure by Tamora Pierce, so the first in the Song of the Lioness quartet, I guess, or series, is great. Really, really great. Young, strong female protagonist. She's a twin, and she doesn't want to be a lady. She wants to be a knight, and so she works to make that happen. So, yeah, so I really like this one. Do I have another one? I can't remember. Oh, and I love The Fiend of Our Tapestry by Guy Gabriel Kay. This is a Canadian book. I absolutely love this. This has a slight urban fantasy feel, just because it starts in Toronto, but it very much is fantasy, you know, and it's really, really cool. Older characters, they're all in their 20s or older, so they have some life experience behind them, and it's really epic. There is some hard stuff in this one, but I thought it was totally worth it. It's one of my favorite series of all time, and it is also, again, only a trilogy, so if you dive into it, it's only 3 books. It starts with The Summer Tree, and did I have anything else? Did I have anything else? I am not sure. My goodness. I think I did. Oh, and then for something a little shorter, The Complete Fairy Tales of Oscar Wilde, I think is great. These really are fantasy stories, but it's a very different themes and messages maybe than a lot of other fairy tales. So that is definitely one that I thought was great, and it's a great way to ease in because again they're shorter works. And oh, we're on to question 10, which is who is the most recent fantasy reading content creator that you would like to come across and give a shout out to? Definitely Ben from Ben Reads Books. He is a sci-fi and fantasy reader and writer. I will leave a link to his channel up above. I found him in the past month or so, and he's got such a positive attitude, and I just really enjoy watching his videos and seeing what he is up to and reading, and he does live streams as well, so I definitely recommend checking him out. So there you go, there is the Get to Know the Fantasy Reader tag. This really does remind me to read more fantasy, which is something that I do want to work on. Just the books are just they're so big and they take so long to read, but they're totally worth it. So it is going to be something that I'm going to try to work into the rotation more. Thank you to Anita for tagging me, even if I don't read that much fantasy. I do really, really, really love urban fantasy. It is definitely, holds my heart, and they definitely tend to be shorter books, so there is that. If you have not done this video, if you have not done this tag and you enjoy fantasy, I definitely am tagging you. I would love to see your answers. I will leave a blank list of the questions down below if you would like to participate, or if you would just like to, you can always do a tag like in your journal or in the comments or on your blog. It doesn't have to be a video, but you can always just do it for yourself and or share it, it's all good. So there you go. There's the Get to Know the Fantasy Reader tag, and I will be back soon with another video. Thanks for watching.